Okay, for our first 3D animation, we are going to make a ball bounce, and we're just going to make it bounce up, straight up and down for the first one. So let's take a minute and set it up so it will look nice before we start creating the ball bounce. So let's delete the cube, hit the delete key or X on the keyboard, and then press delete with your mouse. Let's add a plane, a ground plane for the ball to bounce on. So down in the add menu or create over here, UV sphere or shift A, they all work. And let's get a, sorry, not a UV sphere, a plane. Let's get a plane and then scale it up. So press S on the keyboard to scale. And I like to bring it up just beyond the grid so I'm not dealing with the grid. I'm going to get rid of this light and get a little better lighting system in there. So I'm going to right click on that and delete it. And then I'm going to do a shift A or go to the add menu or however you want to do it and get a UV sphere. And then I'm going to smooth this just to make it look a little bit better. So I'm going to come over here to the modifiers and do a subdivision surface modifier. And just bump it up to 3 on each. And then to finish off the smooth, I come over here to Tools, and under Shading, I click Smooth, and that will make it really smooth. Okay, so now, oh, one other thing, I'm going to add another plane. So go to the Add menu, add one more plane, and let's bring it up. I'm going to hit 1 on the keypad to do a front view, and 5 for orthographic view. I'm going to rotate it, R, at about 45 degrees, and then G to grab and move it out here behind the camera somewhere. And I want it to be pointing at the ball, so it's perpendicular to the plane. And then I pan around a little bit, scale it up a bit. And it's kind of just trial and error with the light. This is going to be the light. So I'm going to go to the Materials tab, click New. First of all, I'll go change it to Cycles Render up here. Use nodes, change the diffuse surface to an emission surface, and then I usually just bump the strength up to 10, and then of course it's trial and error how big I want the plane, so how much light. So if I hit 0 to go to my camera view and then F12, that looks about right. Just a quick test render. Now on your render, go to the Render tab, under Sampling, make sure your samples are at 10 right here. So under sampling, and that's good for a test render. And when we do animation, we're probably not going to go above 10 unless we really want to make it look nice, because it takes a long time to render each frame. Now select the ball, hit 0 to get out of the camera view, and that camera view was just to make sure that I could see the ball in the camera view. And of course I would change it if I couldn't see it. You don't have to be in camera view to render. Okay, now got the ball here. I'm going to start with the ball up in the air a little ways. Go back out of orthographic view, 5 on the keypad. So the ball's up in the air. Now I'm dealing with my frames down here. So I've got a set of frames, and I'm going to set several keyframes, certain positions that I want the ball to be at. I'm going to save those positions, then the computer will render in between the in-between frames. So just knowing the count of frames for good timing, and I know from our reference image from the 2D ball bounce that up at the top it's of course frame 0 or 1, frame 1, we're starting right here, 1, and it ends at 250. We're going to move that back after a while. And then when it hits the ground, it goes to, it starts with 7. So the first thing I'm going to do is set a keyframe right here with the ball up in the air. So if I press I on the keyboard, it gives me this menu of keyframes that I want to save, or different types of keyframes. And so there's location, I can save the certain location that it's at, rotation, scale, or we could do all three, location, rotation, scale, which is usually what we do for the basics of animation. So press I, make sure your cursor is in this 3D frame right here. Press I, get the menu, and select location, rotation, scale. And it sets a keyframe, and it puts it, makes it orange right down here. So that's how I know it's a keyframe. And then on the timeline, it looks yellow. There's a little keyframe right there. So now I'm going to move it to 7, frame 7. I can see it right there. I can see it right here. Or I can bump this with these arrows or use the arrow keys left and right. And I do that quite often. So now on 7 is good timing from the reference image that I remember. After I move the timeline, or the bar on the timeline, then I can move the ball. Otherwise, it's not going to work, because if I move the timeline, let's see, if I move the ball first and then I move the timeline, it's going to go back to where that keyframe is. That keyframe now is set for all the frames until I get another keyframe in there. So frame 7, then move the ball down. I'm going to go down through the plane a little bit because I'm eventually going to put a squash on there. And then I on the keyboard and location, rotation, scale. One thing that will make that easier, since we're doing location, rotation, scale keyframe for all of these, is I'm going to, right down here, there's a set of keys for keyframes, and I'm going to select location, rotation, scale. And so it's just sitting there, and every time I press I on the keyboard, it just automatically sets it at that frame, that type of frame. So now I'm at the bottom, frame 7. I'm going to go now to frame 12. That's going to be the top of my bounce, and I just know that from the timing. And I don't want to go as high as I had it before, but I'll just set it right there and press I, and see right up here it says successfully added 9 keyframes, because I had this location, rotation, scale set right there. I don't have to select it every time. And I'm going to just check. I'm going to go back to frame 1, see how it's a little bit higher. In fact, maybe I didn't go down quite low enough. It's probably not going to bounce quite that high on the second bounce. So I'm on that keyframe, I move it down a little bit, and then press I again. It resets the keyframe. So now, first one starts up there, and then it bounces to about there. It's about right. Now I'm going to move to frame, after 12, I'm going to go 17 to go back down to the ground. I'm going to squash it a little bit less on the second bounce, so I go into the plane not quite as much. And then press I, sets the keyframes. And then what I know about timing is that I'll go to frame 21 this time and go back up, not as high. Press I. I want to kind of check that with my other. See, that went down a little bit, but not very far, so I'm going to go down just a little bit further. Press I again. It resets those keyframes. Okay, I'm going to move it to frame 25 now. Go back to the ground. It's going to squash a little bit less. Press I. Then I'm going to click and drag and move it to 28, I believe. And I'm going to go back up. Not very far this time at all. Check it against the other one. It's pretty good. And then I'm going to land on 31. It's not going to be much stretch at all or squash at all. Press I. Make sure when you press I, your cursor's up in the 3D view. And then I can make it, bounce a tiny bit a couple more times if I want to, but that's probably good for now. Okay, so if I just kind of scrub through, click and drag, call it scrubbing. There's a little bit of a ball bounce, and that's good. I could even play it right here. First, I'm going to get rid of all these extra frames. I don't need these. And if I render it, it's going to render a picture for every frame, and it's going to go all the way to 250. So right here, I can just click and drag right in the middle, or I can click once and type what I want. If I say, oh, it stops at 31, I'm going to go, say, 35, so the video doesn't stop right when the ball stops. You always want a few extra frames there. And then I can play it. It will just continue to play. It looks pretty good. The timing's pretty good. However, one thing to change the timing that I want to do is I'm going to stick it kind of right in the middle of the fall. So between this frame 1 and frame 7 is where it falls the first time. I'm going to go right in between, and I'm going to pull it up just a little bit, because the principle of animation called slow in and slow out means that we have more frames at the start of an animation and more frames at the end, but less in the middle. And so I move that up a little bit, press I to keyframe it, and now it's a little bit slower at the top, and then it's at the bottom. I'm going to slow it down as well. I'm going to bring it closer to the bottom. Actually, you know what? It's pretty close already. So I'm going to keyframe that position right there before it hits the ground. and it's really close. And so in the middle, when I brought it up, that means it's close. It's up here a little longer than it is in the middle, because it's going to be, I need less frames in the middle, or keyframes, which makes it appear going faster towards the bottom. And then it slows, yeah, it's faster at the bottom, and then it's going to slow back up when it comes back to the top. And so when I put it in the middle and brought it up a little ways and keyframed it, that just gives the appearance that there's more, it's slower up at the top. There's more frames closer to each other, and then they start to spread out right here. It goes a little faster down at the bottom. Anyway, just trust me on that. For now, I'm going to go back to the middle of the next one as it's going up, and I'm going to pull it a little closer to the top and keyframe it. I'm going to go to the middle of this one, and this time it's going down. Let's see if I did that right. Undo that real quick. So the first one's going down, the next one's going up. And so if I put it in the middle, yeah, that's still the same. Go up a little bit, keyframe it I, and make sure it's not, yeah, so it's going to be a little slower there. I'm going to go to the middle of the next one, bring it up to towards the top a little bit closer, and so then it's real slow there, and then it goes faster. Okay, and then the next ones are so small, we're not going to worry too much about them. So now we've got some pretty good timing for our ball bounce. In fact, there's one little jump that I can see. It slows down right there. I'm going to stick it in the middle and pull it up a little bit. Do that one more time. So now as I watch it, falls faster. It looks like it appears to fall faster. Okay, that's great. Now the squash and stretch. I'll just do one, or show you one, and then let you do the rest. So one thing, on frame 7 is where it hits the ground. On frame 6, I keyframed. And on frame 8, I'm going to keyframe right where it is. Just press I. And the reason for that is because I want it to squash right in the middle of that, but I don't want it to start squashing from the previous frame. So to squash it, I can just scale on the Z-axis, or I can click this, and the Z-axis is the blue, and so I'm going to click, so I clicked the scale tool right down here at the bottom, and I'm going to squash it a little bit until the ball comes to the top of the plane. But now it needs to go out a little bit because the volume is not the same because I just squashed the Z-axis. So then I need to stretch out the X and Y axis. So to do that, I could do these separate. So there's the Y-axis and here's the X, but then it's not going to be perfectly round, most likely. So to pull them both out at the same time, I'm going to hold down Shift on the keyboard and then press the blue one, and it pulls both out at the same time. So I squash it and then stretch it out on the sides. And there's my little pancaked ball. I keyframe it with I, make sure you're on number 7, frame 7. So then on 6 it's normal, 7 squashes, 6 it's normal again. So that kind of gives the appearance of it squashing at the bottom of the bounce. Okay, the other one is to stretch, and so on 6 and 8 I'm going to stretch it, which is just taking or stretching it out on the Z-axis. And then if it goes down to the very bottom of the plane, I can leave it there, or I can move it just a little bit to move it up just slightly, and then keyframe that I. And then I can go to frame 8 and do the same. Stretch it out a little bit and move it up just slightly and keyframe that I. So now, and so then what happens is from frame 4 to frame 6, just a couple frames there, it starts to stretch out a little bit. And that we don't have to do, it just, the computer does it automatically, and that's great. It starts to stretch, then it squashes, then it's stretched again, and then it goes back to normal at the top of the bounce. So on the next bounce, on frame 17, you're going to want to squash and stretch it a little bit less because it's not bouncing from as high of a distance. And you want to stretch it a little bit as well on frames 16 and 18. So you'll keyframe 16 I and 18 I, and then on 17 you'll do the squash and stretch so that it stays normal size until it gets to the bottom of the bounce on 17. So you can finish that up, and that will look like a nice ball bounce once you get the squash and stretch down. And we've got the lighting all set up. If I render, and then if you hit 0, now the ball starts way above out of the frame, and so I don't want that. So I'm going to click the menu right here, and of course select lock camera to view, and then I'm going to zoom out so that I can just see the ball, and I don't have to see the whole thing necessarily at the top of the bounce, but I want to see most of it at least. And then I just scrub through and make sure I can see the whole ball bounce in frame. And I've got a little bit of the light in the frame, so I need to get that out. So I'm going to click on that and drag it out until it's out of frame, but then I'm going to come out of camera view, just make sure it's still shining in the right spot, which if I go to a front view 1, 5 orthographic view, see it's shining perpendicular right to the bottom of the bounce. I'm going to hit G and pull it up just a little bit so it's kind of shining in the middle of the bounce. And at that frame I'll press F12 to just see that's nice. Camera view, good lighting, and then I can put a color on my ball too to make it a little more interesting. And then I could render, make sure when you render that, well, it's all set up for an animation. Watch the video on how to render an animation, because you need to set it up right here in this section, the output section, before you start rendering, because it saves as soon as you start rendering.